Hey, I'm Ryan Curran, and this is my presentation for Kinesiology 454, Behavioral Aspects of Sport, and this is my critical assignment. So let's get started. So my target population that I'm going to be discussing is males in their mid to late 20s who are slightly overweight or overweight. And my motivation to work with this population is personal experience with friends and family that are in this group. And I include myself in this group because over the last couple years, I have had trouble maintaining a healthy weight, especially during COVID and before that, when I get busy with school or homework or I'm working multiple jobs. Even things like being in a relationship can contribute to that. So I know what it feels like to be in shape your entire life and start to gain weight. And I've never been obese or anywhere near that, what I would consider, but I've definitely, I gained a significant amount of weight during COVID, and I was unhappy with it because I've always been in shape. And almost every single person that I talked to when I was discussing my weight gain, feeling bad about it, almost every single person I talked to expressed that they had gained almost the same amount of weight compared to their body in terms of percentages. So that kind of inspired me to want to do something where I'm looking at general population rather than a video or a presentation that I'm looking at coaching or a more traditional side of sports. I thought that because of COVID and people staying at home and gaining weight, this would be a perfect opportunity to look a little bit further into a general population. So as you can see in the photo on the right, that is an average male body. So how is this population affected? And this is interesting to start looking into this because it's significantly different, but there's also some similarities between general population and an athlete on a team. So I started out with reinforcement, and according to our textbook, reinforcement can take many forms. It can be verbal compliments, it can be smiles and other nonverbal behaviors that imply approval. And how does that apply to someone that's doing personal fitness? Because you don't necessarily have a coach with you the entire time. But reinforcement can come from multiple areas. It can come from friends and family. It doesn't have to come from a coach. It can come from a personal trainer if you're going that route. But for the average person who's not, verbal compliments and smiles and other behaviors that imply that you're improving can be very, very inspiring. For example, if you're working out and you start to lose weight or you start to get some muscle tone, a verbal compliment from a family or friend, they might be able to notice and compliment the work that you've been doing. Or would say you have a friend that you go out and you run with and your mile time used to be 13 minutes and then all of a sudden they don't work out with you for a couple months and you've gotten that down to 10 minutes. Getting positive affirmation from that friend or that workout buddy that you're with can go a long way. The next one I wanted to talk about was desire to compete. And I wanted to discuss this one because at face value, it doesn't seem like it can be related to personal gains and personal fitness and general population. The desire to compete, when you think about competition, you think about sports and competing against other people. But I want to discuss this because it seems like you wouldn't be able to apply to this, but you definitely can. My idea with desire to compete and how it's associated with personal gains and personal fitness is competition with yourself. So you can use desire to compete to look back at old photos of yourself if you're trying to lose weight, or measurements if you're taking body measurements like at your waist, at your stomach, and you can see how much fat you're burning. Or if you're doing the opposite of this and you're trying to gain muscle, the same thing would apply, but for the target group that I'm talking about, it's specifically for weight loss. So it would be the desire to compete would be competing against what your old weight used to be, and also what your old physical fitness levels used to be, because as you're losing weight, it's also important to be improving physically, like being able to do more push-ups, more sit-ups, more pull-ups, improving on your running time, your sprinting time. Things like that are a good indication. Even if you're not losing a ton of weight, they are a good indication that you're on the right track and your body is getting into the position to start losing more weight. Because the more physically fit you are, the more ability you have to push yourself and burn calories and then make that a lifestyle, which in turn will help you lose weight. So that's how I saw the desire to compete. I found that kind of interesting to look into. And next, the very last thing here quickly was a recent study done that said gender, ethnicity, and budget were not related to weight loss at a 6-month trial period. Readiness to change and reported challenges to making dietary changes were related to weight loss. So pretty much what that's saying is that if someone wants to lose weight and get into shape, it's not up to gender, ethnicity, budget. Those are the type of things you can blame and use it as an excuse if you're not making those goals that you want to. And I've seen that happen, and I've made those excuses myself, well knowing that they aren't legitimate excuses. And the point is that readiness and willing to change, motivation is the most important part of meeting these goals, and that's has a big relationship to desire to compete, and especially reinforcement. All right, let's move on to the next. How was population affected, part 2. And here I wanted to talk about arousal and anxiety because I found these very interesting, and I didn't know what arousal was in terms of in relationship to exercise before I took this class. So according to our textbook, it's a blend of physiological and psychological activity in a person, and it refers to the intensity, dimensions, or motivation at a particular moment. And then let's move on to the anxiety definition. Similar to arousal, anxiety is often associated with feelings of negativity, unlike arousal. So the way I would define the difference between anxiety and arousal is that they might feel very similar, but the reality is that arousal is potentially more of an excited feeling, like that moment when you step out onto the field and you get excited, you get butterflies in your stomach, or that moment when you go out on a first date, or that moment when you're driving to school when you were a kid for the first time. That is not maybe so much anxiety, depending on the person. A lot of times that could be considered arousal. And now that's another thing. How does that apply to personal fitness? Because obviously that can apply to sports, being on the field or on the court. But how does that apply to fitness? And my ideas with arousal are moments of excitement when you're beating your own personal goals. When you're stepping on the scale and, you might have a little bit of nervousness, excitement in your stomach. If you've had a successful week with your dieting and your exercising, you might get a feeling of arousal when you go to step on that scale and see what your weight is. Or you might get a feeling of arousal and excitement when you step on the scale and you see that weight. And that wouldn't be so much anxiety unless you're failing at what you're supposed to be doing. And another time is, arousal could be very applicable when you're going out for a run or going out to do whatever form of cardio that you partake in. You might actually start to get a feeling of arousal, even competing just against yourself. And which is why in the last slide I talked about competition, because that competition with yourself and what your goal is extremely important when it comes to goal setting and people losing weight in a general population. It's really easy to use those as motivation. And anxiety, I mostly brought up populations affected by anxiety if there's feelings of negativity that come from outside. So if somebody is working really hard and maybe they're stressed out because they have to be going to school full-time and working full-time or taking care of a kid, all these can cause anxiousness and anxieties that negatively affect somebody completing the goal of them getting into shape, and therefore would affect it negatively, unlike arousal may actually be a positive effect. And there's a CDC study that I brought up that has relationship mostly to the last slide, and it says families can't change their genes, but they can change the family environment to encourage healthy eating habits and physical activity. That's closely related to outside factors that will affect the population. So moving on, we are talking about goal setting, and I started with process goals. And to kind of review, there's 3 types of goals in goal setting that we're talking about. Outcome goals, which is the result of all the goals that you've been working on, what you're able to accomplish, that end final goal, which we'll talk about third. We'll talk about them in order. And then performance goals, which come after process goals. These are more specific to talk about what you need to be able to achieve to reach the outcome. And then goal setting, process goals are things that you need to do if you are going to be able to achieve the performance goals, which then lead to the outcome goals. So process goals I put for my general population would be two of them, which is run for at least 20 minutes 3 times per week. And eventually you would want to do something more than that. And I say run, but you can also do another form of cardio. That's fine if you have a knee issue or some kind of injury or whatever it might be. And then second would be eat no more than 2,500 calories a day. And as we know in the field of kinesiology, eating is significantly important to losing weight, and if not more important than the actual exercise. So I'm going to briefly talk about strategies to help with the process goals. So for running for 20 minutes 3 times a week, we'd want to use some kind of running app to track what you're doing, and we'd want to use a strategy scheduling planned days that you're going to do it. So let's say you talk to the client and they say, I get off of work at 5 o'clock. We decided a date, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday are going to be the running days, so that I could then text that client, or talk to them and specifically know whether they completed it or not. Because if you don't give a specific day, then they can start to push everything back, and the accountability is a little bit harder to maintain. And for the dieting, you're gonna have to kind of trust the client, and this is really helpful when you're using a tracking app. Like there's health apps that you can track dieting. Everything you eat, you can count calories to the T, and it's really not that difficult. It just takes some adjustment and some getting used to. And if a client's not willing to track calories, then you could do a diet based on what foods you're allowed to eat. So moving on to performance goals and goal setting. So the performance goals, I wrote my client is currently running a 11-minute and 30-second mile, and their goal is to run a mile under 10 minutes, which is very realistic unless someone's extremely overweight. But I think that's a very realistic goal, to cut 1.5 minutes of time in a relatively short amount of time. And then the second goal of my client is able to do 10 push-ups in a row currently, and their goal is to do 25 in a row. That's a little more difficult. That might take a little bit longer than cutting 1.5 minutes off of a mile time, but it's also very realistic to do. And strategies for both of these. For the first one, to cut their mile time down, I would just make sure that what they're doing at least 3 times a week is running. It's that simple. They need to run if they want to improve with their running. The second one, my client adding 15 push-ups to their ability, I would make sure that after each exercise they're doing, they're starting with push-ups and they're finishing with push-ups. So if they're able to do 10 in a row, I would say do 10 at the beginning, run, and then do 10 at the end. And what that's going to do is it's going to start to fit in a bunch of push-ups in a really short amount of time too, because you can do 10 push-ups within 20 seconds, and it doesn't feel like it's taking a lot of time, but it's building you up to be able to do more. So that would be my